Thank you, Dee. Lovely to see you as always. All right, let's get into a big show tonight. Another No Sooks, No Lefties. This Monday night for you, wherever you happen to be, let us get into it because we're going to have none other than James Morrow, Matt Canavan. They'll have plenty to say. Yes, we will debate about the future of net zero, the new climate targets, and who has to pay. Speaking of No Sooks, No Lefties, it doesn't get better than Jacinta Nampijinpa-Price. Fresh from a barn burner at CPAC. She'll have a chat about her speech there and her views on Australia's recognition of Palestine. And speaking of, the Prime Minister currently in New York City. Oh, what a difference 12 months makes. 12 months ago, no, it wasn't important enough for him to go to the General Assembly. By the way, this bloke is away, Airbus Albo, for the next 11 days. He's been back for a couple, but remember it was about a week before at the Pacific Islands Forum. Hundreds of millions here, hundreds of millions there. Wait till you find out. Another thing he's trying to do while he's in the United States. And a reminder, we are going to be in Western Sydney this weekend. If you would like to join us for Greater Western Sydney, their version of Our Town, please send me an email. It is ourtown@skynews.com.au this Sunday, 9 o'clock. Lots of special guests, lots of fun that we're having around the region and look forward to it. If you can get to Western Sydney this Sunday night, get there as fast as you can, ourtown@skynews.com.au. All right, now we will get to the net zero debate. We will get to what I think could well be the biggest issue in Australia that might radically reset our politics. It's a big one and I'll get to it in a moment. But first, as you know, the Optus situation, it keeps rolling on. Now, we explained on last night's show, and always a reminder, please join us on the Sunday night show because many of the points we make there get a good echo for a few days to come, but also we take a little time to deep dive into things. And Trevor Long, the technology expert, spoke about how this is not a repeat of what happened a couple of years ago, and no one's holding water for Optus. But as you know, the situation has got worse as this day has rolled on, where certain Optus customers were unable to connect to OOO, despite the fact that they could connect their phones to everything else they were calling over the past couple of days, but they couldn't to OOO. And the media is loving it as the headline story.
Optus has revealed another 7 people were unable to reach 000 during last week's fatal outage. And we are tonight learning more about the telco's botched response, with the federal government warning Optus will face serious consequences.
The embattled telco is facing intense scrutiny, with the communication watchdog launching an investigation, vowing to hold it to account.
An enormous failure that was perpetrated on the Australian people is how the federal government's describing Optus's 000 outage.
I think for about the 800th time, the Optus CEO has said the obvious, sorry.
I also want to reiterate that we take full accountability for the technical failure and that we were unaware of this for a period of time, which is an unacceptable gap in time. I will ensure is fully investigated.
Now, again, there is plenty to answer when it comes to Optus and no doubt plenty of big fines and all the rest of it. And I stand by all of those that are having a crack with some big exceptions. Again, the domestic politics here and the government trying to pretend that they are going to solve this crisis when in actual fact they are part of the problem. Let me show you the receipts in a moment. But remember when Airbus Albo in his first term was flying around and he didn't want to answer any questions about Australia while he was overseas because he was out doing the globalists' work. No interest in discussing domestic matters when overseas. Remember he used to say this all the time?
I make it a policy, I said this on my first visit, I intend to stick to it, that I won't be commenting on domestic issues while overseas. I'm not commenting on domestic issues while I'm overseas.
Unless, of course, he thinks it's an easy way to blame somebody else, make it look like he's solving a problem that, of course, I repeat, I'll show you the receipts, they may well have been part of. Each Way Albo is the nickname, and he's proving it right again because this time he will talk about a domestic market. He will talk about a domestic issue, even if he's on the shores of the Hudson in New York.
Quite clearly, Optus's behaviour is completely unacceptable. We have made that very clear.
Should the Chief Executive consider his position?
Oh, look, I would have thought I'd be surprised if that wasn't occurring.
Okay, first thing. The Australian government may be incredibly powerful, but it is concerning to me when politicians especially the leader of the country, start talking about that CEOs of private companies should have to walk the plank. The idea that our elected leaders form part of the pressure groups on these business leaders is a bit of a sign about how that triangle of dependence, when remember, the majority of the population now, through either working for the government or getting welfare from the government, more than 50% are reliant on state and federal governments. And companies like Optus, their biggest clients in many ways at times become federal government departments, meaning don't rock the boat. Well, he is, of course, not, as best as I know, a shareholder in the company, but still he's joining in the pylon. And this is not a defence of Optus or its CEO. It's a reminder that we are supposed to live in a free enterprise country. We are supposed to live in a country where companies, their shareholders and more immediately their boards make the decision about who leads the companies. And again, in case you missed it last night, and I get it, there's a lot of footy around, busy times, but I'm going to repeat a key point about some of these people who are trying to jump on the bandwagon and scream the house down, demanding responsibility for this disgrace that has happened with Optus. And the impetus for it is because some people have lost their lives. How dare the South Australian and Western Australian premiers carry on like the pork chops that they currently are, demanding action, absolutely outraged because people's healthcare was compromised or in some cases people lost their lives. These are the people, if that's the standard, who should be resigning tomorrow. In South Australia, 100 people have died because an ambulance is waiting to drop somebody off at a hospital that doesn't have enough beds. That means when you call 000 and the phone line works, there could be a delay in the ambulance. How dare these people? 85 people have died as a result of problems in emergency departments in Western Australia. So please, save me the dog and pony show that the Prime Minister gets to decide who the private CEOs of this country are. Secondly, bugger the premiers who have responsibility over a state government health system that in both of those cases is getting worse when it comes to hospital ramping. That means more people die because they don't get to a hospital bed and more people die because the ambulance doesn't get to pick them up. So it's all well and good to carry on like Optus is the big bad guy in all of this, and they got plenty of blame. And again, I do not carry water for them. I don't know any of the people involved in it, and if I did, I'd still rip into them for doing a shocking job. But now we get to the Communications Minister. The future Prime Minister, at least that's what she'd believe in her quieter moments, Annika Wells. And she's out and about and the media's running when she swings the arm and starts issuing threats again to this company. She says that they will have significant consequences. Now, the receipts. The federal government was handed a report after the last Optus mess a few years ago. It made a serious recommendation and the government has failed to follow up on it. The recommendation that someone's specific job should be to keep an eye on the 000 network and that person should come from the communications department. See why they're making all these noise? Catherine Wheels, look over here, look over here. Now, who knows? If this person was in the position, would they have been able to prevent what's taken place? I don't know. But unbelievably, it's the Turnbull Times, the only media outlet actually talking about this until we have the conversation here. The government promised 000 custodian, not yet staffed for more than a year. An independent manager of the 000 emergency system has not yet been staffed by the federal government, despite it being a key recommendation of the review into Optus's last emergency outage. So there they are. Distract. Oh, yeah, the CEO, give him the arse. There will be significant consequences. Well, what about for the Communications Minister or the boss of the Communications Authority or for the Prime Minister who were told that they had to have somebody essentially as the standby 24/7 policeman inside the system? I'm going to read on here because, again, the receipt matters. The second recommendation on his hit list, delivered to the government in March, of 2024 was for the government to establish a 000 custodian with oversight and overarching responsibility for the efficient functioning of the 000 ecosystem. March last year. We've gone from March last year to March this year. It's now September. Do not fall for the distraction of the government who says nothing to see here when they themselves had been told and agreed that this person who would have responsibility for the efficient functioning of the 000 system was not in place. Again, I continue here because this matters, all right? The government response in April 2024 called for this priority recommendation and recognised the need for a single organisation with oversight of the emergency call service, but further investigation and consultation was needed. Any sorries from the Communications Minister today? Any sorries from the previous Communications Minister, you know, the one who wanted to censor the internet, who is now the Attorney General? No. This is what we heard from a future Prime Minister.
One of the things that I've been looking at across the weekend is how I can fast-track regulatory and legislative relief to make sure that all of these are delivered in full.
They've had since April last year. What is there left to fast-track? Who went go slow? Where was the list of names? Will there be any follow-up to this revelation today, or will we follow the well-trodden path of everyone saying the single CEO, they're the one to blame, get rid of them, everything gets fixed? Clearly there is a systemic problem at Optus of which there should be consequences, no question. But I repeat, April last year. Now, when you see this press conference tomorrow, see if anyone asks a question about it. Let's see. Challenges to those who claim to be more straight down the middle than the opinion here in Sky News Primetime. Let's see what they have to say, because that matters. Now, as you know, we talk a lot on this show about the obvious consequences of record numbers of people being brought into the country. Now, we know that largely this is the Ponzi scheme of population, where you need more people in this generation to pay the tax for the previous generation who are coming out of the workforce and starting to need billions of dollars in, among other things, healthcare, the age pension and welfare. Well, well done to the Institute of Public Affairs, because they have not been scared off by those who seek to bully anyone having a conversation about what the consequences are of the size of the number of people coming into the country. Have a look at this. This is the amount post-pandemic of people coming into the country, in fact, part of the net migration. You have a look at this here, the components of Australia's population by financial year. The red here is overseas migration rather than natural increase, i.e. people having babies. Now, we know this to be the case. And, because this number that's on the far right of your screen is slightly less than the one before, or slightly less before that, they say they've fixed the problem. Well, that number is still wildly above everything in 15, 16, 17, 18, 19 and the pandemic year of 20. Lots of discussion about this at CPAC in Brisbane over the weekend. The Conservative Political Action Committee, there's highlights of this up on our YouTube page or up at skynews.com.au.
Let us now turn our attention to the matter of mass migration.
One of the reasons immigration has become such an incendiary issue is because nothing reshapes a national story more quickly than those who come to be part of our great country.
Not that long ago, we used to have a controlled migration program.
Now, let's talk about migration, shall we?
Matt Jacinda and James Morrow on the show this evening, all three attending that event in Brisbane over the past couple of days. Now, back to the Prime Minister. 11 days he is going to be away from Australia. He's in New York, where, of course, they have already recognised Palestine. There'll be a formal vote on that by the time you wake up tomorrow. Then he will give a completely meaningless speech to the UN General Assembly, of which, you know, it'll be about a quarter full. Why? Because A from Australia is a lot different than U from the United States of America, and they do it in alphabetical order. This is an event that the Prime Minister did not attend last year, or in fact the year before that, because you see there was domestic responsibilities, but of course that was all because Airbus Albo was catching on. Well, Airbus Albo's back up in the air And he is spending the best part of 2 weeks away from the country after spending, what, almost 2 weeks away? Oh, but he pops up in Cairns for a press conference while they're refuelling the jet. Oh, that means he's right across things. This is a bloke who, remember, when illegal boats bump into the country, he says, oh, sorry, I've been in the car. This is a bloke who until recently said, when I'm overseas, I'm not going to talk about anything domestic. Well, there are big issues here to deal with in Australia, like, say, 3.4 million households that'll run out of food by Thursday. But boring, yesterday's news, cost of living crisis is over. Well, one of the things that he's going to try to do is like a Football World Cup or the Olympics. He's trying to get Australia to convince the United Nations that we should be hosting a climate conference, the COP. Now, this is the one where countries stand up, give speeches, or leaders like Joe Biden fall asleep at. Most notably, the reason why they want to do it next year is because, just like the Kyoto Protocol of 2007, just like the Paris Agreement of 2015, they want the Adelaide Agreement of 2026 to be what starts to bind the world towards the targets of 2035. So it's a branding exercise. Despite the fact that this country is $1.4 trillion in debt, nah, bugger it, we'll just keep doing it. And of course, all of the Canberra Colombos, none of which have access to a magnifying glass to actually go and have a look where this money comes from, whether it comes from the budget or off budget because it's an investment, but all of it ends up being borrowed. Why? Because the government spends more than it takes in, and that is due to be the case for the next 40 years. Now, Adelaide is the location where the Prime Minister is going to try to convince people in the UN that this is what we have to have. Now, amazingly and ridiculously, we are involved in a bidding process. And just like a bidding process for a FIFA World Cup or to convince the IOC to give you a summer or winter Olympic Games, you need to go around the world and promise a little bit here and a little bit there for the countries to vote for you. But right now, Turkey is the other country that wants to host it. So we are in this ridiculous scenario where we are bidding against another nation to have a climate conference. Why not do what they did with the Olympic Games when the two countries that were trying to bid for it, and the only two countries at the time of serious bidding for it, was Paris in France or Los Angeles in the United States. The IOC just turned around and said, oh, I'll flip a coin. You take 2024, you take 2028. Nobody was really bidding for 2032, so that's how Brisbane ended up getting it under the Palaszczuk government. But we are in a bidding war for a freaking climate conference. A climate conference that will cost us money. Now, the upper end of things is a couple of $100 million. The midpoint seems to be at about $100 million. And wishful thinking is that it'll be below that. Here is the Prime Minister explaining that one of the reasons he has to be in New York in person, buggering off from Australia for another 2 weeks. But because he's freshly elected and most of the key media people go with him, no one's going to rock the Airbus elbow plane on this one. This is him saying about why we need to do it and are we spending money in the bidding process. Have a look.
You're meeting the Turkish leader Erdogan, trying to convince him to pull out of the process for holding the COP. Would we be offering Turkey any sort of financial incentive, do you think, to pull out?
There clearly will need to be some compromise on both sides in order to move forward. I don't want to preempt those discussions. If it is not agreed that one or other country withdraw, and our bid, of course, is a joint bid with the Pacific, then the default position is the conference goes to Bonn. So neither Turkey or Australia in the Pacific will host.
I took a pledge not to swear. But you can imagine every swear word that's in my head when I hear that stuff. I mean, it's just BS. No one in Australia, and certainly no one in normal Australia, is hands and knees praying that we're going to get a climate conference. And even those who want one, whether it's this year or next year, because they have a COP every year. No, this is about the vanity of the Adelaide Accord being what we talk about the world over. This is madness. It truly is. And we will talk about it in a moment or two's time with Matt Canavan and with James Morrow. Unbelievable. We are using taxpayers' money. What amount of money and what do we offer to Turkey for them to get out of the way so we can host the climate conference? Fair income. Now, I mentioned this before. I think that there is an issue that is not hiding that could be a massive reset for Australian politics. Now, as we know, the latest opinion polls in and around the Liberal Party at the moment, well, they stink. Why? Well, because, of course, they got thumped at the election and they've kind of gone back a little since the election. You compare that to when they were winning in the polls, you get the headlines that you've seen in the past couple of days, particularly about men and younger voters. Well, let's just focus in on the younger voters part of this, because what's really annoying me is all these conversations about what the fight should be, but we know that sometimes some of that fight is going to alienate younger voters. When will the right side of politics offer hope? Now, I get it. Hope is not something that is owned by the left. Compassion and kindness is not something that is owned by the left. And for way too many younger voters, they believe that those of us that are right of centre or even further out are too pig-headed to their needs. And as I have done from shows in Hobart to Queensland, and for many, many months here on this program, both before and after the federal election, I've told you the stories of people that are willing to tell me that they would vote for a completely different party that they have never voted before if they think that it will get their kid closer to owning a house. Now, the Labor Party president, he too has recognised that while 94 seats, massive, huge, no question, but because most of those were won on preferences, the Labor Party primary vote was at about a third. What he was saying is that the win was wide but shallow. I think housing could reset Australian politics. Now, we've seen that the Prime Minister is trying to do this with public funding, and many of the conversations he is having is, of course, among other things, about public housing, not private housing. Many of the state governments are trying to talk about this. And I don't know what the answer is. It is a multi-trillion-dollar problem. Why? Because anyone who owns a house wants that house to be worth more than when they purchased it. Why? Because we've all got to sell the house to pay financial kaplunk to make sure that the back nine is going to be worth it. Conversely, everyone who wants to buy a house wants it to be as cheap as possible, and those two don't mix. Why do I say that this is the issue that I think can win an election for whoever answers it correctly? And at the last election, people thought it was Labor, but there's nothing to say that couldn't flip to the coalition if they come up with a big idea and they bang it in early enough. The Resolve Political Monitor came out with a very fascinating series of findings around the question of, is it harder for people today versus yesterday? Are people, young people, better or worse off? Now, the question goes for 100 years, but all you need to know is, young people today, much better off, little better off, unsure, no different, a little worse off or much worse off. 49% of all voters, including a larger chunk in every demographic from 18-year-olds to 55 plus, 49% say that it is a little or much worse off for young people today. Have a look at this. The yellow, do you think it is more difficult for young people to buy their first home than it was for previous generations? 3/4 of the country is the top left-hand one. Young people, a little more generous, but 72%. 35 to 54-year-olds, the one paying off the mortgages right now, well, even more of them think it's harder. And even the people who it is their kids or their grandkids, 78%. If you are looking for a slam dunk that could flip an election, imagine the party that comes up with the policy that actually helps this or the next generation buy a freaking house. 76% believe that it is harder to buy your home now than it was previously, and 45% of people say that not enough or more needs to be done. Do not let this be an issue where the Greens get to go forward because they promise free for everyone. Do not let this be an issue for Labor to win on because they have something and the coalition has nothing. This is a chance to change votes. Fingers crossed, someone, somewhere, regardless of whether they are the left, the right, or somewhere in the middle of the coalition parties, can wake up and work out that issue of housing, the availability and the access to it, may well change 94 seats into the 76 that somebody actually needs to pull the country forward.